Welcome to Method and Madness.
This is an ongoing conversation about great books hosted by writers Aaron Gwynn and Brad Kelly.
In each series, we figure out what makes a book like Moby Dick or Blood Meridian worth reading,
and how writers might learn from it in order to master their craft.
We'll also explore the labyrinth that lies beneath the novel
and find out what it means to our most insightful friends. Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins, my sin, my soul. Lolita, the tip of the tongue taking a trip of 3 steps down the palate to tap at 3 on the teeth. Lo, li, ta. She was low, plain low in the morning, standing 4'10" in one sock. She was Lola in slacks. She was Dolly at school. She was Dolores on the dotted line. But in my arms, she was always Lolita. Did she have a precursor? She did, indeed she did. In point of fact, there might have been no Lolita at all had I not loved one summer a certain initial girl child in a princedom by the sea. Oh, when? About as many years before Lolita was born as my age was that summer. You can always count on a murderer for a fancy prose style. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, exhibit number 1 is what the seraphs, the misinformed, simple, noble-winged seraphs envied. Look at this tangle of thorns. We are honored to be joined today by Kat Rosenfield, best-selling novelist, culture columnist, defender of men's rights, and even more impressive, men's wrongs. Kat, welcome to the show.
I wasn't expecting that last one. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So I know Brad has all sorts of things he wants to get into. Could we start by, do you remember when and where you first read Lolita?
Actually, no. I know that I graduated from college without having read it, and so picked it up because I felt like I should read it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would have been in my early 20s, I guess. I think I was working in publishing at the time and picked it up from the free table at the publishing house where I was. And I would have probably read it on the subway, which was where I did most of my reading in those days, the New York City subway.
Were you shaking your head or nodding your head while you were reading it for the other riders on the subway?
To signal to everybody. Actually, I hid it in a copy of Cosmopolitan magazine with one of those covers that says like 5 ways to blow your man's mind by sticking a finger in his anus.
Whoa.
Yeah, because that was less embarrassing and less scandalous. No, but it's so funny. I have very little memory of reading it the first time, and that made it a real pleasure to pick it up again because I was really rediscovering what a delight it is in so many ways.
It is. It is that, man. Brad, when did you first read it?
You know what's funny is this was the first time I read Lolita, and now I'd read, I want to say 4 or 5 other books by Nabokov before this, and somehow just slipped around Lolita. I don't know if it was some like latent hesitancy about the subject matter or what, but I just never read it until now, and it's amazing.
Cool.
I mean, it's worth all of the hype. So, yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed this. I was traveling and I read it in about 4 sessions, I think. So it was
That's
it was
awesome.
pretty cool. Yeah.
I was in my second year of grad school. The summer came, I could do reading on my own. I'd just taken this like seminar in postmodern literature, and the professor kept talking about Humbert Humbert. And I was like, oh, yeah, I got to read this. And the woman I was dating at the time, she was like, oh, it's really good. You got to read it. And man, I was bowled over. I was like, following her around the house, reading passages to her. And she's like, I know it. I've read it. It's good.
What is the so obviously, so we're all in agreement. It's great. what what is Aaron, like I kind of have a sense of your tastes. What is it about this that if is it the humor? Is it the wordplay? What is it?
Well, first
Yeah.
it's the prose, right? It's the language, it's the very skillful alliteration. And I was also, as I was rereading this morning, thinking I'd never noticed this before, how few adverbs he uses, which I found interesting. Um, it's also that I didn't understand the kind of game that Nabokov was playing the first time I read it. In my first reading, I read it in this very sincere way and was seduced enough by Humbert in this world that I would always be shocked when, like the night at the hotel when after the mom has been killed and he is intimate with Lolita and then he says that thing about lying in bed beside a frightened crying child, and that the fact that I had lost sight of that for a moment is part of the mastery of what Nabokov does here, I think. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. I mean, there is definitely this sense of like you forget, yeah, you do get kind of lost in it and you forget, oh yeah, the thing that Humbert is up to is sort of terrible. Right?
Yeah,
Not
of
sort of,
course.
is
Yeah,
terrible.
it is terrible.
Um, yeah, but yeah, you do get kind of hypnotized or lulled or whatever term we want to use just by the nature of the writing for sure. And Nabokov is like the best writer of paragraphs I think I've ever encountered.
It's
Just like
incredible.
every solid chunk of text feels like its own thing. It could exist almost on its own.
Right.
Yeah.
Kat,
Yeah.
what about you? What is the connection to you for you?
The sorry, can you? I've forgotten what the initial question was.
No,
No,
no, that's
sorry.
fine.
We're
No,
wandering.
so I connected, I think, at first to the prose and then to this dark narrator, like almost like the man from underground, Dostoevsky's. What was your kind of point of connection with the book, do you think?
Oh gosh, yeah, this is interesting because, of course, Lolita has become this real sort of touch point for a lot of discourse and a lot of disapproving discourse. Everyone is sort of anxious to dump on it as a problematic book, the kind that if a guy says it's his favorite, you shouldn't date him because
Right,
something's
right.
very wrong.
It's a
And
red flag.
exactly. And
Right,
so that, at this point in my mind, it had been very much eclipsed as a work of literature by all of the ways that people talk about it, people who often have not read it, who
right.
object to it just kind of on principle and in theory. And so I was so surprised and delighted, yes, by how well written it is, by how beautiful the prose, also by how funny. It's
It's very
so
funny.
incredibly funny. And I think it's funny on many different levels. Obviously the sort of alliteration and the poetry and the music of it, considering the subject matter, is often so kind of humorous and like sort of in a self-aware way. And I appreciated that, although I understand it too as a way of sort of making you form an intimate relationship with this guy who is telling a horrible story, or a story about a horrible thing rather, but in this very charming and also self-deprecating way where he's sort of like, oh yeah, I'm a
Right.
monster, and you're like, yeah, you are, but I kind of like you.
Yep.
And so there's that part of it, but also just the sort of straightforward, like often the jokes right on the page when he describes the letter that Lolita's mother wrote to him confessing her love, and then he starts kind
Right.
of editorializing about it and how he put it in the toilet, and it's straightforwardly funny. And then it's of course wrapped in this framework of it being like a posthumous diary published by a psychotherapist who thought it was an interesting case study, and that is also very funny.
It
hmm
is.
hmm hmm
I
And
was noticed.
the introduction that Nabokov wrote under the name, what is it? It's like Dr. John Ray or something, right? It's Nabokov posing as this therapist writing about this book. It's yeah, there's funny things in just the way it's set up, I think. Absolutely.
Yes, that
Yeah.
reminded me a lot, that introduction of the prose style of this book that was written as a work of satire, and I think the 1920s, called Is Sex Necessary?
Hmm.
By a couple of guys posing as, like, legit psychotherapists or sex researchers. And it's intended to be a work of humor, but in the guise of something serious. And it really, the opening of Lolita, the introduction by this, psychiatrist, was very reminiscent of that to me.
Mm.
It's weird rereading it now because I can't have that authentic like first experience. You can't have it again, where you're seduced by this character and then horrified and then seduced and horrified. So I don't see that. Now I see like traps Nabokov is setting. Like
So,
in the Doctor's introduction, for instance, he references Vivian Darkbloom, and then, a few chapters later, just kind of buried, Humbert talks about this anthology of literature that's being put together, and then Claire Quelty comes up for the first time. It's kind of buried, and then Vivian Darkbloom is connected with Claire Quelty, and it doesn't seem the Doctor is making those connections necessarily.
right, right. So,
Hmm.
so you're sort of at a reread, you're sort of in on the game too, in a way that it's like when you find out wrestling is fake when you're a kid, a little bit.
Well, it's sort of like I see myself falling into the trap, and I'm playing like a chess game, except I'm playing checkers and Nabokov is playing 5D chess. That's the way I feel. And I'm trying to skirt him, but he's too he's too smart.
Mhm. Yeah, Kat, like I think last July, I believe you had an article in the Press kind of in response to J.K. Rowling, who's everybody's like well, everybody has very different feelings about her, right? Um and she had apparently said something along the lines of I have a quote here. A plot that could have been the most worthless pornography becomes in Nabokov's hands a great and tragic love story. And of course, some actress, Suze Kempner, had found this tweet or found this bit of interview and raised the alarms on J.K. Rowling for probably the third time. J.K. Rowling had the mob going after her that week. Um, but I thought you had a really insightful your response to this in the Free Press. I thought was really insightful, but it did sort of make me. It's kind of I see the book getting thought of in that context as like either it's romantic or it's terrifying. And I guess I want to ask you, knowing that this is a simplistic and kind of stupid question in a way, but is it romantic or is it terrifying, this book?
Porque no los dos, right? It's
Yeah.
I mean, I think that there is. I wish that I had revisited that piece that I wrote. I'd forgotten that I wrote it, so
Oh,
that I
okay.
could have talked more intimately about it. But I mean, isn't horror and romance, aren't these two things incredibly intimately connected, both in literature and in life? I mean, a lot of love stories are also very scary stories.
Mhm.
Basically, any love story has a tragic ending. Even the ones that work out well, eventually, people are separated by death or disease or some mishap. Um, so yeah, I don't think that, and I think this is kind of a category error that people make when they try to criticize J.K. Rowling for describing it as a love story. It is a love story because,
Mhm.
it is, that quite literally, in the eyes of the man who is telling it, that's what it is. And then you have the sort of meta narrative of the author who's writing this, who's not the character, who is allowing you to see both the story through the eyes of Humbert Humbert, who views it in one way, but also to see the story through your own eyes from a remove, and to, occasionally he intentionally kind of knocks you out of the fantasy, even if you've managed to become entrenched in it, even if you've been seduced by the way that Humbert Humbert describes all this stuff. He, like Aaron was saying, he intentionally yanks back the curtain and reminds you this is a child that somebody is having sex with, and
Right.
you're going to have to reckon with that as you read.
Because of Humbert's desire and the way he wraps that desire in this beautiful prose, and the humor is part of that, it it masks the human girl at times, and you can forget about it or think about it differently because you're inside this guy's addiction. Lolita wasn't the first. There were others. He tried to replicate Lolitas for himself, and then he found the one that kind of ended him. Um, as a woman who once was 12 years old, do you have a kind of connection to the character Lolita or insight into why she does the things she does and how she's processing?
That's really interesting. Because when I read the book, the character, obviously, who I feel like I spend the most time kind of occupying the same headspace as is Humbert Humbert, even though
Right.
he's a person I have very, very little to nothing in common with, as compared with Lolita, who, as you said, she is a 12-year-old girl. I too was once a 12-year-old girl. I think actually that, and this is a brave thing that Nabokov does, that he does not shy away from depicting, in a way that is true, some of the kind of paradoxes of being a girl on the cusp of womanhood, and of, awakening to the existence of yourself as a sexual being and to the existence of your desire, which is real, but you don't necessarily know how to handle it. You're maybe not
Hmm.
necessarily having it awakened by the proper person, or you might not be aiming it in the right direction because it's a tool that you've not yet learned to use. And there are moments in the book where, insofar as a 12-year-old girl can have any agency, he allows for the fact that, there's some part of her that wants to do this, even though it's not good for her. And the person who knows that it's not good for her should know better than to lead her into these situations or to take advantage of that. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
wanted
absolutely.
I want to keep going with this because there's something I'm very curious about, and I'm kind of articulating it for myself as I'm talking through it. There's a line in Philip Ross' The Dying Animal where the narrator of that book is involved with a much younger woman, though not a minor. Um, and he's commenting on her, and he says that, she's very beautiful. She knows her beauty has power, but she's not sure what to do with it yet. Right? So she's coming to this understanding, men want me, I have this sexual power, I'm not quite sure how to wield it. And of course, in the case of Lolita or an actual 12-year-old girl, that's, I mean, for one thing, 12 years old is a child, very incredibly young. Um, but was there or is there a feeling for girls that age when they begin to like sense that they have some kind of power in that regard?
I mean, I can only speak for myself, I guess. Although, well, no, I'm thinking now about conversations that I had with my friends when I was that age. It depends on, I think, how early a bloomer you are,
Right.
but and also about how you feel about the bloom. But
Hmm.
at 12, chances are you have, you're a year or two into puberty, You may be
Hmm.
menstruating. Um, you're certainly aware of sex. You may be aware of yourself as a person capable of experiencing sexual desire. And chances are that you're not yet attracting male attention.
Hmm.
This is the a key thing about Humbert Humbert is that he is a pedophile.
Yes,
But he is not interested in girls who look like women. He's interested
that's
in
right.
little girls.
That's right.
Um, and so, at the age of 12, it's, I think, more that you are aware of the existence of a woman's power as something that you will come to possess, that you're sort of on the cusp of, it's there. You see women older than yourself using it,
Mhm.
to their advantage, enjoying it. And you may find yourself thinking, like, I want that. I'm looking
Hmm.
forward to that. That's not
Hmm.
every girl. There were definitely in the cohort that I hung out with, there were some who were, I don't want to say sexually precocious, it's not the right word, but who were looking forward to growing up.
Hmm.
And there were some who were sort of in denial about it and were just really into horses.
Yeah, yeah. I think like I mean it's so different for I think it's very different for boys. But I was 12, I was such a kid. But I remember going back to school like whatever that was, seventh, eighth grader, from summer, and the girls who had been like kind of hanging out on the playground, right, or involved in games, where all of a sudden it was like a veil had dropped between us, right? And they weren't
Hmm.
interested in us. They were interested in eighth or ninth graders, right? And there was a sense they had become like they were becoming these other beings. And we were still, and certainly I was still very much a kid. I was like, well, let's go play football, like
Hmm.
during recess. I was playing. I wasn't worried about, my hair or being attractive or any of that. And the girls I went to school with, like there was this kind of like not obsession, but a noted concern all of a sudden about their appearance.
Yeah, that sounds the right. I mean, that squares with my experience as a boy when I was 12. Girls, I had neighbor there were neighbor girls that I grew up with that I grew up playing with, and then yeah, there was sort of a moment where they were like, "Oh, they seem suddenly like they're 3 years older than me."
They
Like,
were,
yeah,
yeah, there was a
overnight.
gulf. There was
Yeah, and they
all
were
of a
they were
sudden
tall.
this
I mean, physically taller than me
physically
too. And I'm
taller
not
than
a
me.
short guy either,
Yeah.
Like I'm taller than all of them now. But yeah, there's like this moment. They're like, oh, this is like a whole. They're going. It's pretty clear, I think, that the two processes are not aligned at the at the age of 12 on average.
Yeah, well, I mean, women do hit puberty first.
Hmm.
A couple of years. It's typical. Female puberty starts before male puberty does. And I'm remembering, I wish I could remember who wrote this. It might have been Dave Barry. It was some humor writer, was remembering his youth about the same time that you guys are talking about, saying that like he came back from summer vacation, I think before eighth grade or ninth grade, and all of the girls over summer had they had become 6 feet tall and sprouted all kinds of lumps and bumps in places where there hadn't been any before, and they smelled weird and they were acting strange, and they seemed like a different species of person.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, yeah.
Humbert experiences this in a weird way toward the end of the novel, where he finally tracks down Lolita and she's married and with child, and she has the concerns of a a young wife and soon to be mother, and he's trying to like confess. She's completely uninterested, and it's as if she is all of a sudden much older than he is, and his
Mm.
concerns are trivial and are stuck in this arrested development that he details at the beginning of the novel. And I don't want to say he changes, but there's this weird moment where he says that I even though she was no longer a nymphette, even though, she was this grown woman, she's not this woman I've ever been, I still loved her. And that's the first time he has felt that for an actual grown adult woman, which
Hmm.
is sick, but interesting in the context of the book.
Isn't she at the moment when he finds her and she's pregnant? She's not. Is she actually a woman? Isn't she like 17 years old or something like
She's
that?
17, I
Is
believe.
she? Oh, I was
Yeah.
thinking she was older. I was thinking she
But
was a little older.
yeah,
Interesting.
but she's been, I mean, she is now uh she is she's pregnant and she's engaged or
Married.
married. And so yeah.
Right. She's achieved the benchmarks of adulthood, which I mean, I
Right.
suppose at the time
Right.
the book was written, also, the extended adolescence that people of my generation certainly experienced had
Yeah.
not really set in yet. Even
Yeah.
so, I I was struck by the fact that he's talking about her in this way of like, oh, she like I could still see the girl she had been, or I still loved her, and it's like, yeah, she's
Yeah, it
17.
was
She's
yeah,
she
Right.
was she was a girl 5 minutes ago. It's not really
right.
that great a leap to make.
Yeah.
But the other thing that's interesting when you talk about, the fact that she grows up and sort of moves past the relationship in a way that he hasn't, where he's still really mired in his feelings for her and in his mixed feelings about what he's done. She really gets, you know, to the point of being not just uninterested in him, but contemptuous of him in this very adult way, way before she leaves him. There's this moment where she's, I think, like 14 or something like that, and they're driving
Mhm.
around, and she says kind of casually, she's like, "Oh, isn't that the name of the hotel where you first raped me?"
Yep.
And
Mhm.
it's, that's such a moment.
Yeah. And he's
Yeah.
offended.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Well,
also he has, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Brad, please.
well, no, I'm just saying, like, it does sort of because there are these moments. I mean, one of the things that I think is so uh, excellently done throughout this book is showing sort of the ways in which Humbert kind of fools himself, allows himself to be, yeah, fools himself kind of, but also like these little kind of rhetorical moves that he's making I think these are sort of the traps you were talking about, Aaron, where he's sort of these rhetorical tricks he's kind of using on you as the reader that they don't actually work. For instance, Lolita kisses him before
Right.
there's some line that he's kind of concocted in his head that he hasn't crossed yet, and then she kisses him, and then somehow it's like
It's
she's the
on.
one who
Yeah.
started it, right?
Oh, yeah. And
Um,
ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I was not even her first lover.
Right, right, exactly. He's coming up with all of these sort of and yeah, you can sort of see that kind of happening throughout the book, and that's one of the things that I find to be most engaging about it is like, what is the next way he's going to, what is the next set of mental gymnastics he's going to do to justify all of this? But then when she's like, "You raped me," suddenly it's contact with what's actually going on. Like
Right.
she's aware of what's going. Maybe you could talk yourself into like, well, this isn't actually bad for her. Or she doesn't have she's not being traumatized by this. And then when she does that, it's like, oh, that's actually what's happening in her head. And there, it closes the doors sort of morally on him a little bit. Yeah, I love
His
that moment.
response is to buy her baubles and
Right,
take her
right,
places and
right,
show her America,
right.
right? The great tour of like all the little, tourist trap things and every
Hmm.
little, you know, every piece of candy, every little magazine, all the material culture of like the late 40s, early 1950s. He's like throwing it at her. And Nabokov sees us so clearly as, being an outsider in
Hmm.
America. I think he sees that we're a very young nation and we're a nation that is obsessed with youth. I mean, there's a part of Humbert's um, pedophilia that is about the old world's lust for the new world,
Hmm.
as I read it.
See that?
I was also interested in that the tour of America because, yeah, it is so kind of materialistically focused. And I mean, obviously, in some senses, it's really just a pretense for Humbert to basically book a whole lot of hotel rooms
Right.
and and spend the year having wanton incestuous sex with his stepdaughter. But the thing about accumulating the tchotchkes or getting the candy, getting the ice cream, that also struck me as a kind of an effort to almost bury Lolita alive underneath this pile of childish tchotchkes, as if he could kind of freeze her in time underneath that,
Hmm.
and she would remain a child forever. She would remain, in love with him as he imagines it forever. And so, in the sense, he kind of like just crystallize the relationship in this one place and never have to reckon with it and never have to lose it.
Yeah. No, that's really well put. I think that's certainly what's going on there. Yeah, that's pretty brilliant. That's this whole thing about the America. I mean, I think if you there's a way that you could edit this book down, take out a bunch of stuff, and just leave the sort of commentary on America, and it would still
Hmm.
be, I think, an enjoyable. Some of that I think maybe can get lost in the discussion of this book, but I love it as like a picture of America driving around the places that you go. Yeah, it's
Which he
It's
did
well
like
with.
done.
it's like
Go
Travels
ahead.
with Charlie,
A
except,
little
Yes.
bit, right, right. But this
Yeah,
horror, like this horrific thing is sort of happening
that's
every
right.
night. But at the same time, it's like, oh, we're seeing the Corn Palace in South Dakota. Yeah,
Well, like
it's
Nabokov did this with Vera, right? He and Vera drove around all of the. I think actually she drove because she took care of all of the practical things because he was incapable of doing it. By the way, like the first draft of this book, which has been published now, it was called The Enchanter. I think it was
mm,
originally written in Russian, and Nabokov tried it and this way, and he tried it that way, and he was in the backyard with a lighter and lighter fluid about to burn the manuscript when Vera snatched it out of his hands. So
mm,
she's the first person who saved Lolita.
interesting. I wondered a little bit about like, you imagine yourself sort of writing this book, and sure, your wife is understanding of your overall creative project, but then starting to read some of these pages and thinking, Vlad, what is this about?
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Yeah, but
need you to answer a few questions
she knew
before,
though, man. She knew that it was
yeah.
about more than it is
Mhm.
this perverse love story.
Hmm.
Um, and it is this oh gosh, uh picture depiction of America as a young nation, having grown strong by harnessing its resources after World War II, and now like entertaining itself with baubles and chewing gum and goofy pop tunes and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And
I
then
read
you,
it. Oh, go
yeah,
ahead. Sorry.
please.
No, this is sort of a different point, but you got me thinking about this. I read a criticism of Lolita that sort of indicated that the character of Lolita is sort of never really given a full existence as a never comes across as like a fully realized personality. And I kind of took issue with that. I think I mean, we have the distance from it's Humbert telling us about it, but I think her personality like really actually does come through pretty strongly. I don't know how you guys felt about Lolita as a character. Is she realistic, I guess? I don't like that word, but
I
or does
thought
she
so.
seem, yeah, okay.
I mean, she felt true to me. She felt very much, I mean, as I was saying earlier, I think she really embodied a lot of the sort of uncomfortable realities of what it's like to be a 12-year-old girl. Things that, especially at this point, we really don't like to talk about. We really don't like to acknowledge because, there are uncomfortable implications to it.
Mhm.
And
Absolutely.
also, I think I don't want to get too real here. Um, Periodically in the news, there will be a story about, a celebrity. I mean, we just had the whole thing with P. Diddy, right? A
Hmm.
celebrity who is abusing children. And there's this, rightly so, public outcry, and then a very quick forgetting, as if like it's just a few bad actors. Where I think Nabokov is showing us it like that disease is in the fabric of the young nation we are. That lust after youth, and that, I mean, you see it in every part of our culture. You see, I mean, women who, have talked to me about the way that they feel like they're discarded once they'd lost, or were seen to have lost like these trappings of youth, that there was no place for them. Or certainly there wasn't a place like they had 10 years before or 20 years before. And I don't think that's unique to America, but it's certainly very American.
Yeah, when you first started talking about that, I felt like maybe I was going to disagree with you because I do think it's important to make a distinction between youth as it's fetishized by American culture and sexualizing and fetishizing children, which
Hmm.
is not a typical thing.
That's right.
Which is what Humbert does. And I suppose we could say that, like, well, Lolita, and she's yes, she's a child, but she also represents something bigger than herself.
Hmm.
But I'm trying to be wary of conflating these two things.
Hmm.
But what is interesting to me is that I do think that the sense of becoming irrelevant in middle age is a product of a much more contemporary cultural wrinkle, which is that there's this expectation now that you'll be sexy forever, basically,
Hmm.
and that you need to sort of preserve the illusion of being, you know, to be sexy, to be like in your fertile years, to be available in that way
Hmm.
forever, even, into middle age and beyond, where it used to be possible for women, and it was sort of expected that yes, you would be young and beautiful, and then you would have children, and you pass the torch to your daughter, and you would ascend into the next stage of life as a matriarch,
Hmm.
or eventually as, the crone, or,
Hmm.
if you didn't have children, you could become the spinster who might also be a witch. You could be Baba Yaga in your chicken hut and,
Hmm.
casting hexes on the townspeople. And we've had a real narrowing of the kind of range of archetypes that women are able to occupy and that we're seeing in storytelling, to a point where all that's really left is the idea that you're going to play the ingenue until you're 80 and you die.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, you're either hot or you're dead.
Yes.
Yeah, that seems really unhealthy.
Yeah.
That seems really unhealthy. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know enough to know this. I don't know if that is the case in other countries and other cultures, but it certainly is the case and has become increasingly the case as Nabokov like diagnosed this particular pathology. It is the case in America.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seems
But
to
was it
be.
at the time he was writing this book? This is what I'm wondering.
Mm.
I mean, in the
Yeah.
wake of World War II, you had, well, I'm thinking about the landscape at that time. There were fewer men around because so many of them had been killed.
Hmm.
Women, though, who had come into the workforce during the war were now being told to leave and go back into the house and go into the
Right,
kitchen and stay there.
right.
So, yeah, maybe this was the beginning of a sort of a shift away from empowerment in certain ways.
And American culture, American material culture, and I mean advertising, marketing, corporations, became aimed at girls Lolita's age.
Well, yeah.
The pop music, the films, everything became aimed at
Mhm.
them. And if you were a grown man and a grown woman, well, you need to get the house with the picket fence, and you need to get a brand new Cadillac. We want conspicuous consumption. You need to have a
Yeah.
lot of kids and buy those kids the baubles and take them to the movies. And I'm not like a Marxist or something. I just think that's sort of what America
Well,
became.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and when he's writing this 1955, it comes out. I think, in American culture, we really the whole marketing thing as we see it now was a completely different animal to my understanding pre-World War II. We didn't even really understand how to use sort of take advantage of people's psychological weaknesses to sell them stuff. I think, it's a little bit of a simplification, but I think, sort of prior to World War II, you sold something by convincing people it was reliable and, telling them the features of it. And then afterwards, you sort of get more of the appealing to people's sexuality, etc. And that probably leads to somewhat of a kind of an augering down, right? All the
Mm.
images of women that are presented, then not all, but increasingly, then probably images of women are presented as sexual objects, even more so. Yeah, I don't know.
I'm circling around. I'm still circling around this carcass that I first spied,
Like
trying
an
to get at
enchanted
different,
hunter.
like an enchanted hunter. Kat, why do you think? Not even the past criticisms of Lolita. Nabokov wasn't sure he was going to be able to get this thing published, and it was published by Olympia Press, and then became a sensation and kind of became famous like in a backdoor kind of way. So it was turned down by American publishers, and Nabokov didn't think he was going to be able to get it published in America initially. But why do you think Lolita upsets people now? Why do you think Lolita upsets people in, well, when you wrote the article in 2024?
I think a few things have happened. So it has to do both with what's happened to our ability to read. I think that we have collectively, I mean, not we as in the people on this call, we're all above this. Um,
That's
Of
right.
course.
but as a reading public, I think Americans have become, with every passing year, less and less sophisticated readers
Right.
and less able to parse complex material. I mean, I'm sure that you guys also saw this article that like kids these days, college age, like can't read an entire novel. They don't have the muscle to do it
Yep.
anymore.
Mhm.
I think that that makes it very challenging for a book like Lolita, which is not an easy read,
Hmm.
to,
Hmm.
to exist and to be criticized in the way that it deserves, because people just can never get beyond the surface of it, or even just the pretense of it. And in tandem with that, I think also we've seen a certain amount of political ideology, and feminist ideology specifically, make its way into the culture, to the point where there's an expectation that somebody writing today is going to nod at feminist, I don't know, kind of norms, mores. Like if you were writing a book like this today, you wouldn't write it the same way because you would be expected to acknowledge, like on the page in a very
Hmm.
straightforward way, that something bad is happening, and to impart the
Right.
proper moral lessons about, what has been done to Lolita and what this man deserves for doing that to her. I think actually this book would come in for a ton of criticism, and probably has, as you were saying, for not quote unquote centering Lolita, for not making
Mhm.
her like enough of a character, for daring to tell the story from the perspective of the man who rapes her.
Mhm.
And that, again, that has something to do with the fact that are not sophisticated enough really anymore to deal with a challenging book like that, but also with the expectation that books are going to serve a certain political purpose. And you see that a lot, just in terms of what gets published now, that you are sort of expected as a writer, that, especially if you're writing literary fiction, that you will adhere to certain pieties. Um, and I guess maybe that's just how it always is. I mean, I can't imagine
Mhm.
that any book really exists completely independent or context free of the culture in which it's created. Um, so, yeah, I've gotten a little lost in my point here, but I think
No,
things are
I'm
happening.
I'm
That makes
following you.
sense.
So I've the last 10 years, the big shock for me is as a Gen Xer in the 80s when I first got into music and art of some kind, it was like conservatives who were saying if you listen to Ozzy Osbourne, you're going to worship Satan, do drugs, and commit suicide, right? And that was those were the censorious people. So I was like, oh, I don't want that. I want to be able to listen to Guns N' Roses, and I don't think anyone Ozzy's going to drive off the cliff is going off the cliff anyway.
Mhm.
But my shock was when I saw people who were who said they were liberal begin to behave as if they didn't understand that novels and films, etc., are representations of a thing and not the thing itself.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, that was a rude awakening for me too. Um, and it is interesting how much a lot of the messaging from the left that you grew up with, and I also grew up with as a kid in the 90s, that was, let people make things, stop trying
Yeah.
to censor things,
That's right.
was actually code for we should be the ones who are censoring things.
Oh
Right.
gosh,
Right.
killing me,
Right.
killing me. Do you
Yeah.
think that's really it? Do you think that it was like fake all along?
I mean, I certainly think that the past, let's say, 15 years of culture has been an exercise in revealed preferences on that front.
Dang,
Yeah.
girl.
That's well put. Yeah.
Well, okay,
Yeah.
so I don't want to drop this because this is really interesting to me.
Oh
And
God, this is my favorite bullshit. Let's go.
is it really? Okay, okay. So when did you first notice it? What you said this was like realizing that the people that you felt were your tribe, people who were liberal and loved art and were not going to be uh not going to have our morality dictated to us, et cetera, et cetera. Like, when was the moment, or was it like a slow dawning when you realized, oh my gosh, like they don't care about the same, they don't value the same things I value.
Okay, so I want to say quickly, I wouldn't say it was necessarily people in my tribe because
Right,
I've never really been a joiner, for
right,
better or for worse. But it was people who I thought shared similar principles and similar values to me who turned out not to.
right.
And I would say that my first beginning to notice this probably happened around 2014,
Mm,
uh, in the world of young adult fiction, which is where I was a writer at the time.
hmm.
And it became an article of faith very quickly, and to me, very surprisingly at the time, that people thought books were supposed to impart certain moral messages, and that books that failed to do this caused harm and needed to be, um, censored in some way, needed to be restricted. And this took the form eventually. I mean, it started out as like, we need diverse books, which was a phrase that I nominally agreed with.
Hmm.
We should have more and different types of people writing more and different types of books.
Sure.
But that very quickly became sort of the fine end of the wedge for people who wanted to amass power in the sphere of young adult fiction to start canceling the books of people they saw as competition on ideological grounds.
Right.
And there would be these petitions that would circulate in private Facebook groups to try and get a book either pulled for edits or just straight up canceled from publication because it offended somebody who had appointed themselves kind of the witchfinder general of problematic young adult literature in that world.
Insane, insane behavior.
And the
Yeah.
Yes.
and the YA world is really I'm not involved in it, but from an outsider's
Don't.
perspective, it's a mine. It seems like a complete minefield of this
That's where
kind
the
of stuff.
battles seem to be. Yeah.
Yeah, for whatever reason.
I think that's where the battles begin, and I have a theory about why. I
Tell.
think literature for young people and content for young people in general is a sort of an early warning system for what's coming down the cultural pike. Because if you want to get some footing for a movement, being able to invoke the specter of a young person, a child being harmed by a book or a
Mm.
television show or a movie is a very easy way to foment a lot of animus and a lot of moral outrage and to be off and running. And once you've found that to be an effective tactic, you can transfer it into other spaces where people are similarly politically engaged. And I do think that, I mean, you guys tell me if you think this is true or not, but I think that you've seen this bleed out into the broader culture, and it's specifically concentrated in literature, in like literary fiction, in sci-fi, and in other spaces maybe where women perceive that they've been shut out of the kind of elite Writers Guild and
Hmm.
yeah, and want to like correct for that.
Hmm. Yeah, I have to think about that. I haven't thought about why it's the case. I only know that it is the case. I noticed this about 2014 too. I can't remember the particular like event, but it was just I wasn't on Twitter then, uh, but things would filter down to me, and I'm like, they're saying what? Like, why? What? And I remember it was around this time, maybe it was a couple years later, 2016, and I'm blanking momentarily on the author's name, but he wrote a best-selling novel called Underground Airlines, and it was narrated by it's like set in the future. There's this kind of, segregated society, and slavery still exists in the South. And the narrator is a black bounty hunter who goes after like enslaved people and everything. And the book did well in terms of sales, but one of the first things I read was this article by Roxane Gay, and she was like, "It sounds like that sounds like a really good premise, but should a white writer be writing it?" And that kind of slapped me because I'm of the opinion that if it's a good premise, any author should write it.
Yeah.
That's what a fiction writer is. A fiction writer is a ventriloquist, and it doesn't matter what your, you know, identity markers are. If you come up with a good premise, you should write the book.
Oh, it's so frustrating. I could unload on that stuff forever. I mean, if you wanted to, as a writer, if I was interested in following all these like careful rules about everything, I would
Good
have been an
grief.
accountant or something. Like it's
No
not the
kidding.
territory for that kind of silliness. Yeah. But it's also limiting on both sides, honestly. Like sure, you can ask that question and for a second maybe it sounds like a good question, but then it ends up being a force to pigeonhole everybody. Because then it's like, okay, well, does the person of color then have to write about a person of color, or can it starts to it gets so reductive. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I've reported on a bunch of situations like that, including this guy, Alberto Galaba, who wrote a really great book that was it featured a black protagonist who was attending like an elite university, and it was one of these kind of cool like college literary dramas, and he had this amazing response to it from his agent, from everybody who read it at the outset, and the agent was like, "We're going to go big with this. We're going on submission." This was in I think it was around 2020 or maybe just before. It was at the point at which everybody got obsessed with own voices. Were you guys familiar with this?
Oh no, what's that?
That was basically just this, it was a hashtag. And the idea was that stories about marginalized people or marginalized characters should be written by authors that shared their identity characteristics with their characters. And I mean,
Mhm.
it was as pat as that. And
That's called
so
memoir. That's
Right.
called memoir.
yes, I mean, like, if taken to its logical conclusion, it makes fiction categorically impossible, which is,
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And
it's a problem.
Tolkien
Well,
can't write about hobbits because he's not a hobbit. He can't
yeah.
write about orcs. He can't write
Well,
about elves.
well, there's
Tolkien might
also
have been an
this.
orc.
Yeah, it's
I
possible.
Could have
you don't
been,
know.
right? You don't
There's
know.
a double-edged sword as a male writer. There's sort of a double-edged sword of this thing where it's like you're not allowed to write about women, but also if you don't write about women, what are you, some kind of male chauvinist who doesn't, you can't, you sort of almost can't win once that
Oh,
discourse gets really
absolutely.
ramped up. Yeah.
Yeah, I think about this all of the time, actually, that the problems with this and the kind of fundamental disingenuousness of it is really revealed by the fact that it's only ever applied in one direction. Nobody ever suggests to a woman that she can't write men.
Right.
And it's
Right.
really just like it's basically just this rent-seeking exercise for people who feel they need some kind of construct that will allow them to break in as writers, and that requires preventing other people from writing. But just to finish telling this story about
Yes,
Alberto
I'm sorry.
Galaba,
Please,
no, it's
please.
fine. I just want to make sure that he gets his due. So his agent came to him and was like, we really want to highlight your identity as a Black author telling an own voices story. So can you send me a little bit more information about yourself? And he was like, well, I'm Filipino.
Mm,
And
mm.
instantaneously, the excitement for the book vanished. They were like, whoa, whoa, we need to have some conversations internally about this book, and we need to get
Oh
you a
God.
sensitivity reader. And the next thing he knew,
No.
this woman who was Black but was from England and whose parents were from the Caribbean
Hmm.
Hmm.
was doing a sensitivity read on the book and trying to tell him that his character was inauthentic in this or that way
Right.
because yeah.
Right.
And
Right.
so, and this is, obviously it's one story, but it's a microcosm for exactly the type of thing that happened in this moment when everyone just got so obsessed with identity and trying to match fictional characters to their authors.
Yeah.
So my agent sold my third novel in 2019, and it was the worst possible time to do this. It's a historical novel set in the 1820s, 30s, and 40s in Texas and the South. And there are two main characters, and one of them is an enslaved woman who keeps escaping. And so I'm writing from the POV of a, black enslaved woman, etc. And the novel sold, and I have no complaints, and I haven't complained about it before, but boy, howdy, do I have a folder full of emails from editors. They're like, "We love this book. We wish the author wasn't white," and which seems like a crazy to me. It's that sounds like a crazy thing to say, and I'm sure they wouldn't say it now, and they wouldn't put it in an email now.
Because of the vibe shift or because they've changed their minds.
Well, because like it's an inherently ridiculous thing to say that someone's racial characteristics um, mean that they're not allowed to write a book.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of unbelievable. It's also, to me, it's sort of downstream of Kat, something you were saying, that like some of this is a um degradation of people's actual ability to read, because like you're asking sort of when was your first exposure to this. The first time I really started thinking hard about it was I was actually in a writing workshop, and somebody had submitted a story about um it was a kind of a fun little magical realism story, and it was very well done. And something about um boys and girls would grow up and you would get an animal in your stomach, right? And I think boys had a bear and girls had a something else, right? And all of the feedback or the workshop revolved around what about trans people? And to me, I was sort of like, I feel like the conversation you're trying to have is actually already in the premise of the story. Like, you don't need
Right.
to put it in the story because the story, obliquely actually does deal with this thing you're talking about. But it's like they wanted it to be in bold lines, like somebody's left out of this conversation. And I just think sometimes, similarly, like with your story, Aaron, it's like, maybe we can decide it's interesting that a white guy writes about an escaped slave,
Well,
right? Like that there's maybe something in there about perspectives
I
and all of that, right?
I don't want to like I don't want to out my agent, but he's British. He's in London, and when we were initially talking about the book and the fact that I was writing, I don't know, a white dude writing about an enslaved black woman as a heroine, he
Mhm.
said, "Over here we call that empathy."
Hmm.
Right?
Which I was like, "Oh, I have the right agent."
Yeah.
But that was in 2015. That was
Mhm.
before this, you know, we went down this weird rabbit hole where everything became bizarro land, and now things are completely different. Like we did 10 years in the, wherever we went as a culture, and now things have completely shifted. Coming out of this fever dream we've been in, hopefully into something better, but it won't be what it was. It'll just be something different because things never
Mm.
go back.
Yeah,
Um,
and you hope that there isn't a sort of I don't know what the opposite of that thing is, but I think anything can get pathological. So hopefully there's, we
Well,
don't
I know what it's going to be. It's people on Twitter talking about the shape of skulls. It's going to be horrific in an entirely different way, right?
Mm,
It's like that sucks too, obviously.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
we have this new kind of, I mean, or maybe it's not new, but a resurgence of prudery now happening on the
Mhm.
right. And I saw this, I recently wrote about this show, Dying for Sex. Obviously,
Hmm.
it's not a book. It was a podcast and then it became a television show, but it's very beautifully written. It's a
Hmm.
very moving story about a woman who, having learned that her cancer was terminal, decided that she was going to leave her husband of 15 years and pursue sexual fulfillment in the final years of her life.
Hmm.
And it's a true story.
Hmm.
And the number of people, coming from the political right who were like, "This is disgusting. This
Right,
shouldn't be told. It shouldn't be
right.
told. It shouldn't exist." And
Mhm.
that's exactly the same thing that people like Roxane Gay were saying,
100%.
back in 20, I don't know, 14, 15,
Right.
and on up.
Mhm.
And you just have, I think, maybe it is universal human impulse to kick down the barn because you can't build one. I don't know, but it's
It,
very
Mm.
frustrating.
it's not even a hot take, it's just the truth, and you'll know it's the truth when you hear it. They're the same people. They're not different. It's the
Mm.
same personality. It's the
Mhm.
same people. They wear different colored, one wears a red tie, one wears a blue tie. The kind of person who looks at art that way, they're the same person.
Mhm.
Yes,
Yeah, I think that's
That's
largely
all it
true.
is. It's all
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing. Now, I'm still back to my carcass that I'm circling. So Nabokov follows Lolita with pale fire, and instead of a nympholept, there is a man who's into fawnlets. So he's into young boys of a
Boys.
similar age as Lolita.
Oh.
Um, but there's a really interesting moment where, oh, he's also been a king in a faraway land called Zimbla. Um, and he's moving through the castle, and there's one painting he really loves. And the artist who makes these paintings will use sometimes the actual materials. Like if there's like a golden throne, he will install bits of gold in the painting to
Mhm.
blur the distinction between what is a fabrication and what is actually a real material, right? And the narrator at that point says, reality is neither the subject nor the object of art, which creates its own separate reality, having nothing to do with the reality in which we walk and live and breathe. And I mention that because I think that is Nabokov's view of art generally, fiction specifically, and a book like Lolita especially.
Mm.
So, I
Yep.
mean, it touches on American themes. It touches on the old world, lusting after the new world, but Lolita is also a closed system. uh, by Nabokov's thinking. It doesn't refer to an outside reality. It is a, well, what does Humbert say? A tempest in a test tube.
I quite like that, and I know also Nabokov sort of tended more toward Ada or I always screw this up. Ada,
Right.
his that I mean that book is largely about there being also there's a I believe a incestuous cousin relationship or incestuous sister relationship. I'm forgetting. I think sister. But there's also in that book part of the premise is like there is another world, which is actually the world we live in that you can like interact with while you're dreaming. As part of the premise of
Mhm.
that book. So this is definitely something that he's working on and thinking throughout his, and that's his last book or his second to last book. So that's certainly something he's working through.
Lolita feels, back to this kind of earlier thing, Lolita feels realist to me in the final scene we have with her, where she's a married woman
Mhm.
expecting a child, and she doesn't care about any of the stuff, or she says she doesn't care about any of the stuff that happened with Humbert and Quilty, etc. She needs money because they're getting ready to have a kid, and she's worried about her husband. And that's when she seems most to me like, and Nabokov would hate the word real, but she seems at her realist to me personally, or if you want to say a round character or a fully fleshed out character, or however you want to come at that.
Yeah, I can certainly see that. I had moments where I wondered, is all of this, not all of it, is there some line beyond which this is just Humbert's fantasy or imagination, right? Obviously, he's falling further and further into sort of a increasingly alcoholic, but also like paranoid sort of skits out, right? See, there's part of me that wonders, like, okay, when did that actually begin? And did he, sometimes it's a silly question, but I thought it was interesting looking for the clues. Like, did he ever even actually have sex with or rape Lolita? Or,
Right.
at some point, did Humbert break off from reality? And this is all just sort of, an extended fantasy in a way. And does it matter
Hmm.
ultimately?
I mean, I think it matters, but I also think that it's pretty clear from the book, even though he uses a lot of euphemistic language to describe it, that yes, he did have sex with her, or force other acts on her.
Mhm.
I kept returning to there's this moment where he describes how, like, in the wake of one of these, frenetic and maybe somewhat upsetting but intimate lovemaking sessions with Lolita, that he becomes aroused again and she notices and she's like, "Oh no," and it's
Hmm.
played kind of for laughs, but
Mhm.
that felt I don't know, that felt real to me in a way that having her be straightforwardly traumatized or like just straightforwardly um a more straightforwardly salacious rendering of it would
Right.
have been less so. It's
Right.
also interesting when you posit, that Lolita feels realist in the moment where he encounters her as a married woman who's expecting a child. I think there is something to that. And also because in the aftermath of that, the scenes that follow, in particular the moment where he murders Quilty, is absolutely absurd. It's like a slapstick
Yep.
thing to the point where I had to go back and read it again. I was like, did he just murder him? Did he just
Right.
die? Because that was very funny and like it
That
kind of
is.
I blew right past the part where he actually died.
Hmm.
I,
No, that
I
is actually one of the funniest parts. So they're rolling around on the ground, and he does end up killing him, and then he goes downstairs, or is it upstairs? And there's like a party going on.
there's
Yeah.
Yeah, the
yeah,
whole thing is
and
hilarious.
bullets are leaking. It's as if they're leaking out of the muzzle
Right.
of the firearm, right? And being
Yeah.
European, knows nothing about guns.
Yeah.
Um, Also, at least in the way Humbert frames the story, I like narratives in which we meet a bad guy and we're like, this guy's the worst monster. And then, as Milton said, in every deep, a lower deep opens,
Mhm.
and then there's Quilty, who's even worse than Humbert, at least as Humbert tells it. I This time around through the book, I don't know, I can't tell, but for the first time it occurred to me that Quilty had sunk his fangs in Lolita before Humbert,
Hmm.
Mm.
before
You mean
Humbert
it,
encounters her.
it? Oh, like before? So you're talking
Yeah.
before the incident at the hotel, even?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
And it occurred to me
interesting.
that the hotel is part of the design of Quilty to see Dolores again.
Interesting.
I'm not willing to like stake anything on that. I'm just saying it hit me as a possibility.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
There's something to that. There is something very well, there is a sense in which there's a lot going on off the page here and with Quilty, really, right? I mean, just he's been there's sort of the back third, I guess, of the book, sort of starting maybe even more than the back third, starting when Humbert begins seeing the Aztec red convertible, and
Right.
then it
Right.
morphs into other cars, and
Right.
what do we even think is following us at this point?
Right.
Um, yeah, it does get a little blurry as sort of like what is the off page action that's contributing to this, which I quite liked about it. Yeah.
Hmm.
Kind of a devastating final paragraph where he looks down into the town and he hears the laughter of children and he thinks that Lolita's voice won't be among them
Mm,
Mm.
mhm.
because he's robbed her.
Yeah. Yeah. There's also just the wonderful sort of irony of the whole thing towards the end where, there's no Humbert doesn't get punished for other than sort of in his own soul for the actual crimes he's committed and does get punished legally for um killing the guy that was perhaps, arguably even worse than I don't know if he's worse, but you know what I mean?
Right.
He sort of does the thing that we as readers kind of want to do to Humbert at times.
Right.
And that's
Mhm.
what ends up sort of ensnaring him. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I want
I
to be,
mean, oh, sorry.
please, Kat, please.
Oh, I was just going to say, I keep thinking about both how the story is framed around Humbert and also how he reacts to certain moments. Like there's the thing with the car following them, and then there's the revelation of Quilty, and then there's his confrontation with him. And I mean, sort of trying to dovetail that with the question of what is a story? Is it a representation of the truth? Is it a closed system that helps us like explore sort of in a snow globe situation,
Mm.
one aspect of something real, but it's caricatured, it doesn't necessarily look from every angle like it's real. Um, there is a sort of a sense on Humbert's part of himself as the hero of a story, and he has these moments where he senses that maybe he's actually either not the hero and also maybe not the villain, but rather like a side character in somebody else's story.
Mhm.
Right.
um, that Lolita has this life outside of him, desires outside of him, that he does not define her as a person, that their relationship ultimately did not define her as a person the way that it did for him. And that seems very threatening to him. And I'm I don't know. I sort of wonder if there's something like a meta commentary in there about the nature of storytelling and how we self mythologize and self narrativize.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful. And I also think this book, like Nabokov's great novels, is a hall of mirrors. And I mean, I try to like get at a particular angle of it. And even as I ask a question or I'm talking about a particular aspect, I realize that there's another trap. Like I'm locked in this particular reality that Nabokov has created. And so I mean, I was just thinking about it's not exactly a frame because there's nothing on the other side of it, but the preface that the doctor writes and his whole take on the book we're about to get, the novel we're about to get, is that, well, this ought to be published because this is a warning, to young folks everywhere about how to lead a moral life. which when Nabokov, introduces his own novel with that, immediately we smell a rat, right? It's
Right.
like, well, okay,
Right.
well, that's certainly not the purpose of Lolita. That's what the people on Twitter apparently want it to be.
Yeah.
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 I actually am curious, we haven't talked at all about this, the question of Lolita as an artifact of a pre-digital world.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Could this book exist in any way? Could a story like this exist in any way in the a world transformed by the internet? And I'm not just thinking about the, rapidity with which information can move, but about how we now kind of live these double lives where we live life, but we also treat life as like an outward facing performance of ourselves that other people are
Mhm.
supposed to be watching and is supposed to be interesting to them. Um, and I don't know, it's like a narrative like Lolita, where you have Humbert Humbert creating this. I mean, it is a sort of a performance of self, but it's very winking. And there's a sense that maybe he's trying to convince himself much more than he's trying to convince anybody who's actually reading the book, which does he really expect anybody to?
Good
Um,
question.
how do these things, how does that play in an era where you actually do have an expectation, you have your diary or whatever that if you put it out there, somebody will read it. They will find an audience.
Mhm. And it'll be
Ser
instantly if it's either great or salacious or something, or it catches the right sort of wins, it could end up being spread very widely, right?
yeah, I,
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
want to I want to directly address Kat's, you know, question and idea. I never thought of that. It's fascinating. The question of audience, to whom is Humbert Humbert writing? To whom is he telling his story? Um, One thing that serial offenders of any kind do is they collect trophies. Like you see this in like serial killer documentaries, right? They collect trophies from victims in order to be able to relive the experience. There's a sense in which the novel we're reading is Humbert's artifact so he can experience, so he can molest Lolita all over again.
Hmm.
And then what does that mean for us if we're the readers indulging him in this, right? That's maybe a trap or one of these rhetorical traps you mentioned, Aaron.
I think we're checkmated.
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, I think the chess thing is real in Nabokov. He was very interested in chess. He was a great player, and he was interested in chess. He published books on chess problems and created new ones and all this kind of stuff. And so I think he's going to checkmate you whichever way you go. If you're like, well, this is a novel that is, about the old world pursuing young America, checkmate. If you're, gonna pursue this as like a commentary on, morals, checkmate. Like whichever way you move, he's going to outflank you. And that's one of the more interesting things to me. Now, Kat's really good point about, would any of this be possible before or after the internet? No, because like Nabokov would go online, he would like meet some girl in a chat room. He'd go over to her house and then he'd walk in and there would Chris Hansen would walk out and he'd be like, sit down, sit down. And that would be the whole book. And then
That's
Humbert
Lolita
would be
part two.
telling his
Yeah.
story on like, To Catch
He'd
a
be on a
Predator.
podcast or
He'd be on a
Hmm.
something. Yeah.
Hmm.
podcast, right?
Yeah.
He'd be
Yeah.
interviewed by Joe Berlinger or something.
Yeah.
And yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, anyone who hurts a child, I mean, they better be in hell with their back broke. They're dead to me. Um, the surveillance state that we've created, and I don't mean like that the NSA's created. I mean that we ourselves have given over our
Yeah.
own data and information to these networks. We've done it to ourselves. It sort of makes any kind of mischief impossible.
Mm.
And in some cases, that's very good because I don't want children to be harmed. In other
Right.
cases, like, well, you can't do anything.
Yeah, but we certainly, I mean, uh, to sort of Kat's question, which I don't know is so much about, correct me if I'm sort of going off in the wrong direction, isn't so much about like Humbert's crimes as it is about this sort of interior reality versus exterior reality thing. I mean, I
Hmm.
think I think there's I think there's sort of there's a way in which it could play off. I think if it were to be published now, though, we have so much anxiety right now culturally about how to deal with pedophilia, and I think most people are sort of on the same side, but there's also this like the Chris Hansen thing you mentioned, Aaron. You know, the Catch a Predator. Everybody saw that. They felt like kind of justice was served or whatever. But that has now morphed into like Twitch streamer type stuff where they go
Right,
and they just beat up some guy and they tell
right,
you he was
right,
a
right, right,
pedophile. You're
right.
like, well, I don't know even know what I'm watching here. Is this
No,
staged? Is that, you know,
there are YouTube channels devoted to this where they go like where they just guys just like
right.
find
And
sex offenders and
yeah,
you
and I mean,
know,
I guess we're supposed to just take their we're supposed to just take their word for it that that's what happened before the meetup, and then B,
well,
like we're supposed to
Brad,
be cool with just
no,
beating the guy up and
no, no,
like it's
no,
all very weird.
Brad, we're
Yeah.
supposed to like and subscribe.
Right, right, right.
We're
And then
supposed to smash that bell is what we're supposed to do.
right,
Why
right,
won't you get with the program? I don't
right. And
understand.
right. And so it reminds me of um I was looking at recently 4chan puts out a every year they have like the I don't go on 4chan, but I don't even know if it exists anymore. But they
It
every
just got hacked.
did it?
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
I'm
down
behind
apparently.
behind the
Yeah.
times.
Anyway, go ahead.
Every year they put out like 100 best books, right? 100
Mm,
greatest novels, or not. I don't even think it's novels. I think it's books, and it's actually usually a pretty good list. Like
mm,
you'd look through there and say, yeah, these are all great books. You know, you
mm,
could argue about the order, maybe some stuff got left off. And Lolita is regularly like in the top 10, but
mm.
it's next to Brothers Karamazov and the Bible. And, you know, it's contextualized as this greatest list. And, you know, I saw some sort of commentary that were like, yeah, of course, all those incels would like that, you know, that piece of file smut. And I sort of thought, well, surely somebody on 4chan has read it for that purpose or intended to read it for that purpose, right? Or no? Is that, you know,
Kat, what do you think about that?
I mean, if they did, I would imagine they were sorely disappointed.
exactly. Yes,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
100%.
yeah,
But you
yeah.
might pick
Right.
it up. A person might pick it up for that reason, though, right? I mean, not really understanding what the book is.
Yeah, but then again, checkmate.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. Really, the only way to win against Nabokov is to not read the book.
That's right. That's
That's
right.
true. It's true.
By the way, they have removed this quote from copies. The Random House, who publishes the paperback in their vintage editions. The quote from the first copy of Lolita I ever had was from Vanity Fair, and at the top it said no, the only convincing love story of our time. That was the Vanity Fair quote. That's the first thing you saw. Lolita, Vladimir Nabokov, the only convincing love story of our time.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So I want to be conscious of Kat's time, and landing this particular episode. Do you think you'll return to the book again, Kat?
Oh, yes, I definitely want to. I think that I think it is going to be one of those books that I end up wanting to revisit because it's it is such a rich text. I know that I will notice things on a third reading that I didn't notice the first or second time,
Mhm.
and also that my perspective as a person will have changed in ways that enrich the text for me, which is how I
Mhm.
feel about a lot of books. Like Lord of the Flies, I've read 3 or 4 times at different periods in
Mhm.
my life, and it's like a different experience every time. So,
Brad?
Yeah, I think I will circle back around to it. I might have, like I said, I don't even really know why I didn't read Lolita. I'd read Despair, and I'd read Pale Fire and Speak Memory. Like I'd read and a lot of the short stories, and I
Hmm.
just slipped around Lolita, probably because on some level I knew I didn't want to deal with it. Like
Right.
this exact sort of trap that we're talking
Right.
about, right? Um, it was easier if I just said, well, I've never read it. Um, so yeah, I think I will, though it's also just sort of reignited a more general. I want to read Ada, which I've not read, and a couple other things that I'm, now feel like I'm more tuned in that I could process. But yeah, I mean, it's obviously a masterpiece. I mean, you kind of know it's a masterpiece by page 5 or 6, I feel
It's
like that.
incredible that way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
Kat, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate you talking to us.
yeah, yes.
Oh, thanks so much for inviting me. It was really fun.
Awesome. All right. Talk to you soon.